evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to what I hope will be a unique occasion in Edgware, US. And I say how gratifying it is to welcome so many people visiting from other synagogues and organisations. Tonight is truly an all Edgware and beyond event. To my pleasant surprise, the Jewish Culture Journal, Jewish Renaissance, which I received yesterday, has included tonight's session in its What's Happening session. When I first broached the possibility of an evening devoted to Second World War veterans with our chairman for tonight, Ron Shelley, he questioned why I was going to hold it in early January. On what peg would we hang the evening? Would people come? In fact, tonight is sandwiched between the National Remembrance Day and the Jewish Ajax Parade in late November, when we remember the members of the armed forces who have died in the line of duty, and Holocaust Memorial Day at the end of this month, which is dedicated to those who suffered in the Holocaust, the date commemorating the anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp by the Soviet Union in 1945, at which so many of our Jewish brethren gave their lives. Fortunately, many who fought in the Second World War, which many saw as a conflict between democracy and fascism, are with us today. When you go home, wrote Rudyard Kipling, tell them of us and say for their tomorrow we gave our today. Tonight we pay tribute to all those brave men and women in the Second World War and have with us some remarkable veterans who have their own individual experiences to relate. I shall shortly hand over the rest of the evening, except for some musical interludes, to Ron Shelley. He is the former national chairman of the Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen and Women, or was made an MBE. He was recognised for his work for the group which supports Jewish soldiers, as well as his contribution towards Jewish communal life. He was also my boss when he was treasurer of the Board of Deputies, and I served on the Finance Committee. He is truly one of the treasures of the British Jewish community. Well, it's been recorded. Before that, however, let me tell you about the propaganda short film that you've just viewed of its Jewish interest. Made in 1941 by Charles A. Ridley, it's called Lambeth Walk Nazi Style and an outraged Adolf Hitler. Ridley re-edited existing footage of Hitler, Nazi soldiers, taken from the propaganda film Triumph of the Will, to make it appear they were marching and dancing to the Lambeth Walk. He used the music because members of the Nazi Party had called the tune Lambeth Walk Jewish mischief and animalistic hopping. The re-edit was distributed uncredited to newsreel companies in the US and UK. It's regarded as one of the first political remix videos. The Lambeth Walk has the distinction of being the only popular song to be the subject of a leader in the Times. In October 1938, one of its leaders read, "While dictators rage and statesmen talk, all Europe dances to the Lambeth Walk." Hitler forbade the dance to be played, and this Noel Gay, who contributed the music but not the lyrics, signed a declaration that he had no Jewish blood. He refused. Incidentally, Mussolini fell over whilst dancing to it. Noel Gay was also responsible for Churchill's favourite war song, Run Rabbit Run. And he wrote, The Sun's Got His Hat On as well. He wrote it for his show The Little Dog Laughed, which opened on the 11th of October 1939, at a time when most of the London major theatres were closed. It was a popular song during World War II, especially after Flanagan and Allen changed the lyrics to poke fun at the Germans, singing Run Adolf, run, run. And so did Billy Cotton. The lyrics were used as a defiant dig at the allegedly ineffectual Luftwaffe. On the 13th of November 1939, soon after the outbreak of the Second World War, and also soon after the song was premiered, Germany launched its first air raid on Britain on flying boats that were sheltering in Sun-on-Vaux, Shetland. 2 rabbits were supposedly killed by a bomb drop, although it suggested that they were in fact procured from a butcher shop and used for publicity purposes. Flanagan and Allen.
On the farm, every Friday, on the farm, it's rabbit pie day, so every Friday that ever comes along, I get up early and sing this little song. Run, rabbit, run, rabbit, run, run, run. Run, rabbit, run, 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 run. Bang, 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 bang goes the farmer's gun. So run, rabbit, run, rabbit, run, run, run.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Ron, and I'm the chairman for this evening's meeting, and I welcome you all here. Thank you all very much for coming. This is called Edgware's Jewish World War II War Veterans Remember. It's a little bit more than that, as you can see. It's not meant to be too much of a serious evening, but it will be interspersed with the songs. There'll be a degree of seriousness, and we have two excellent speakers for you. But before we get round to them, I just want to make a few comments about Jewish ex-servicemen. As all of you know, every November we hold a Jewish ex-servicemen parade on behalf of the Jewish community. And last year, November 2016, was the 82nd year which we've held this since the early 30s. And you might ask yourself how it comes about that a small community like ours, less than 1% of the population, has the privilege of forming up on Horse Guard Parade ground, having Whitehall closed with all the interruptions that causes to local traffic, having the police there in force, singing a down our long and saying Kaddish at the Senator, using the Foreign Office, and having the Chief of the Defence Staff or Royalty as the reviewing officer. 2 years ago, it was Prince Michael of Kent. Why is that? Why are we the only community in the whole world, in a capital city, where Jews have such a parade? Why is it that we're the only minority community in this country which has such a parade? The Indians certainly fought for this country. The West Indians certainly fought for this country. But we're the only. And I will tell you why, and that's why you're here. Because we have a record that goes back 250 years. And none of the other communities can get anywhere near. We have a record. The first reference we have is the 1750s, when Alexander Schomburg, whose father emigrated into England in the late 17th century, he was a physician, became the physician at Bevis Marks. And his son Alexander was captain of a frigate called the Diana to help General Wolfe, who was killed in that campaign, to take Canada from the French. Montcalm was the French commander. If you remember that particular battle, when Montcalm decided there was only one way the Brits could attack, was from the inland, and we attacked, in fact, from the hills. We climbed the heights of Abraham. It has echoes of Singapore in World War II. But all the guns faced out to sea, and the Jews and the Japs came in from there. And we have records. We have records from there, up to date, of British Jews, whether they were emancipated or not, who served this country. We have records of Jews at the beginning of the 18th century. Solomon Herschel, the chief rabbi, gave a sermon in which he told the community that we had a duty, we the Jews, had a duty to help this country. 300 Jews volunteered at that time, in the early 19th century. They were called the most respectable individuals of the Jewish persuasion in the newsletters at that particular time. 15 officers. We had Jews who served with Nelson at Trafalgar. We know their names. Moses Benjamin, William Abrahams, John Jacobs. There was a Private Alexander of the 10th Whitechapel Regiment at that time. You may not be aware of it, but the editor of the founder of the Jewish Chronicle, Isaac Valentine, served in the Napoleonic Wars. And we don't know too many Jews who served in the Crimea War, but we do know one of them, because he was at the 1928 Ajax Parade. He was then aged 97, and he was at the Ajax National Parade in Whitehall laying a wreath. His name was Henry Jessel. And if you go to the chapel at Wilson Cemetery, you will see a board with 100 or more Jewish names who served and died in South Africa. And in the First World War, 50,000 Jews served. I've got the VCs, Victoria Crosses, which all know is the highest award for gallantry. Frederick de Pass, right, Izzy Smith, Jack White, and Keyser, Captain G. They all got the VC, amongst others. 2,500 died. And in the Second World War, we had 60,000 British Jews. You'll see a video before at the very end, who served this country. Many of them volunteers. Not all of us, but very many of them volunteers indeed. 3,500 died. Indeed, if you go next door into the shawl, you will see a candelabra on which there are names of 20 young Jewish Edgware residents who died in service in World War II. 22. Let me just read you one citation. And I tell you all this because I am so proud of the contribution we have made to this country. Yes, I know we've made contribution, of course, in the arts, in business, in science, and everything else. You all know about that. But I'm talking about the service of putting your neck on the line, of going out and not coming back. That's something that we can be very proud of what we did. Young boy next door on the candelabra, Sergeant Bernard Torrance, enlisted 22nd of May 1941, Bomber Command, shot down on his first operation on the 23rd of January 1943, aged 20. Buried in Tregonic Cemetery, France, the son of Joseph and Pearl Tragonsky of Italy. Nothing unusual, just being proud. We have a service here every November. One woman on that, one woman. And of course, this is not a lecture. There were many Jewish women who served. Many Jewish women. I can't mention them. Hannah Senish came from Hungary. In August 1939, went out to Palestine to learn agriculture. While she was there, she was approached by the British. They wanted volunteers to drop into that part of Eastern Europe, make contact with the resistance, which she did. But she was betrayed, put into prison, and eventually she was hanged. And there are others. Muriel Bick, Denise Block, got caught, Ravensbrück concentration camp, never came. And at the end of the war, of course, you'll hear this later on, my friend here served, both of my friends who are going to speak served in the Far East. Of course, we had many who served and died out in the Far East, the forgotten army. And subsequent to the war, you may recall, bear in mind this country has been involved in wars, incidents, virtually since the end of the Second World War. If you go to the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire, where we have a memorial, there is the Armed Forces Memorial there. And on it are the names of British servicemen who died in service, in action, including terrorist action, since 1945. There is only 1 year, 1968, where there's not a name on there. Not about Jewish names now, I'm just trying to tell you. So we served in Korea, and we served in Malaysia, and the Canal Zone, in Cyprus, and Kenya, and in the Falklands, where Private Jason Bird, a young Jewish Work 20, was killed. And we served in Northern Ireland and Bosnia, and in Afghanistan, where Lieutenant Paul Mervis was killed in action. We have 200 Jews in the forces today. I say all this because I'm proud and I'm pleased you are here this evening, because the Jewish fighting man has been fantastic. And you may not know this, but in the First World War, and this is we're 100 years on from the First World War. Last year we celebrated the Somme in 2015, Gallipoli, one of the great disasters, one of the three great disasters of World War I. In Gallipoli, we had the first, they're called the Zion Mule Corps, we had the first Jewish troops since the days of Bar Kokhba. The first organized Jewish troop, Jewish officers commands in English, Hebrew, and indeed Yiddish, served as a troop. They were mainly from Palestine, thrown out by the Turks. Nevertheless, they served and died. So that's my introduction to this evening, just to give you a thumbnail sketch of what Jewish men and women have done over the last 250 years in about 7 minutes, and so that we get this into context into World War II.
Ever since the days of old, the navies ruled the waves. For years they've told the world that Britain never shall be slaves. The navy still remembers, and you'll often hear them say what Nelson told Napoleon upon Trafalgar Day. It serves you right, you shouldn't have joined. It jolly well serves you right. It serves you right, you shouldn't have joined. You might have been sitting tight. You might have been in Civvy Street instead of in the fight. It serves you right, you shouldn't have joined. It jolly well serves you right. And it's no use kicking up a row, because you're nobody's sweetheart now. It serves me right, I shouldn't have joined. It jolly well serves me right. It serves me right, I shouldn't have joined. I might have been sitting tight. You can weep and sigh and pipe your eye, but still you're in the fight. It serves me right, I shouldn't have joined. It jolly well serves me right. A life on the rolling sea is not very good for me, but it serves me right, I shouldn't have joined. It jolly well serves me right.
Serves me right. Well, as this is a naval theme, our first speaker this evening, or one of our main speakers, my colleague here, Lionel Lassman, saw from the advert, he was born in 1923, he's now 93. He comes from Bethnal Green in East London, one of the better parts of the world, certainly was. Some of us remember I came from around the corner, it's 70 Green, it wasn't far away. And he had one brother who did national service and another who was just too young. He went to Palmer's Grammar School in the East End, loved playing football and handball, and at 17 and a half he volunteered for the Navy, and at the age of 18 on his actual birthday he got his papers and he was in. He would tell you his own story, but his early war years, he was escorting convoys from Britain to Murmansk in Russia. You remember Russia was an ally of Britain at that time, and those waters, the North Sea, and on the west coast of Norway that was held by Germany, was to say that it was dangerous was an understatement of the First Order. Because that was the only real supply route from Russia. The Black Sea route was much more difficult for all sorts of reasons. He was only due on his ship. He did encounter some anti-Semitism, which you'll mention, and he got some 9 medals, of which I think he brought 5 with him. His jacket wasn't quite big enough. He married to his late wife Vinnie in 1948, had 2 children, 5 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren. Post-war, he lived in Maida Vale and became very concerned and very active in education of young people. And was particularly, he and his wife, particularly concerned and involved with the Balfour Society for Youth in Israel, and locally the Parents Teachers Association at Bayswater Shore. My pleasure to introduce Lionel Lassman this evening.
As one has just said, I volunteered for the Navy at 17 and a half. At 18, I was in. And the thing was, I did a very, very quick course at the uncompleted Butlins College in North Wales, and then did a course in navigation and radar, and was posted to a destroyer. And our job was escorting merchant ships to Murmansk to help the Russians with supplies, guns, arms, and so forth. The seas were mountainous and freezing, described perfectly by Nicholas Monsoe as the cruel sea. They were cruel. And unfortunately, because we had to leave very, very quickly, we didn't have sufficient warm clothing. We had, the main issue was long gutters, which hardly were not worn by many people. And on our last convoy to Murmansk, we only lost 4 ships, which was fantastic. And normally, the losses were very, very great and so forth. We went to Murmansk, unloaded what we had to do, and came back very, very quickly after about 3 convoys, because the main threat of the war was now Japan. The war in Europe was reaching a very satisfactory closure, and Japan was to be the main focus of our attention. So we quickly got back to Dunfermline, where we had a very, very quick MOT, part of the term, and we supplied, and off we went to Gibraltar. From Gibraltar, non-stop through the Mediterranean, and we refueled at the side, the northern end of the Suez Canal, got down to our base at Trincomalee, Ceylon, which was the base of the Far East Fleet. And I used to assist the navigator, and every hour send our position to the Admiralty, so in case they didn't hear from us, they knew our position, our speed, and our course, and they could look for us if we were unknown. One day in the chart house, to my horror, I saw a signal with a massive Japanese cruiser in the area, which displaced 13,500 tons, with triple 10-inch turrets and the most sophisticated radar. We were sent after it to sink it, regardless of the human cost. Fortunately for us, its radar was operating properly. Couldn't pick us up, otherwise I would have blown 5 ships on the flotilla to pieces in no time. We closed on it and sunk it by torpedo fire, accentuated by gunfire. On our way back to join the fleet, a Japanese dive bomber came after us and near us on the port side, killed 6 of the crew, badly wounded 14, and the port side was like a colander. We had to go back to base with our ship like this to keep the port side out of water, but after a time the water was getting into the fuel tanks and we were not seaworthy. We got back to base and eventually it was decided that we would have to go and get repairs. We were very, very lucky insofar as we went to Durban, South Africa, where it took 3 months to repair the ship, and I had a life of variety there. I wasn't sure. Jewish people were fantastic. The hospitality was unbelievable. And while we were there, the dockyard majors did too good a job, because when we went out on steam trials, everything went well. So we had to go back to the Japanese Central War. But after the 2 atomic bombs, the war was over. And VJ Day was celebrated in Durban. And I came back, was developed, and that was the end of my short naval career.
What was the anti-Semitism you found, and how did you deal with tactical eating?
Cash little Sunday, which was just completely gone, and I used to exchange my rum with chocolate. We had a chocolate ration, and I remember taking it from my rum. And occasionally, when we called at a port, we got some fresh vegetables. There was nothing fresh abroad. Dried carrots, dried cabbage, dried potatoes, ship's biscuits. We were on a small ship. We had no facility to cook or bake or make anything, and we just had to make do what we had there. Regarding the other part, we had in our mess a nasty boy from Deptford, I remember his name, Tubby Costing. He rated certain anti-Semitic remarks, and I went to the officer today and I said, I'd like to put the gloves on the costume, because he's making some very, very insulting remarks. And of course, in the Navy, if you wanted to put the gloves on with someone, the officer of the day had to be there with you in case someone was getting badly hurt. We boxed 3 rounds, he hurt me, I hurt him, and that was over. That was the One piece I missed out, after the bombing, I believe my radar cabin to assist with damage control, and much of my work was done near the magazine, which was where all the explosives were held, and still got pieces of metal flying around. Most of my voluntary work was near the magazine, where the damage and injury to me could be substantial, and that's where I was mentioned as fascist.
I'd like to have a few questions from the audience, please, to do with the war and the total going to Russia and to the Far East, anything to do with the Navy. There must be some questions, please. I'm almost sure. Yes. Could we just have your first name, please?
Simon, did you pick up any of the Japanese survivors from the warship that got sunk?
No, we did have Japanese survivors who were concussed in the water, but for the Japanese to surrender was a disgrace, and they would rather commit suicide. A number of them went under the screws of our ship. They committed suicide. That was more honourable to them than to surrender.
Ivan?
How did the Russians treat you when you were in Murmansk?
Well, I couldn't speak Russian. They couldn't speak English. It was a very, very dour place, just solely dealing with armaments coming from our convoys. And the only nice thing they gave us, we went to a concert given by the Northern Fleet Orchestra Choir, which had I paid £100 ticket in those days, I wouldn't have paid enough.
Yes, sir.
Just a minute, I'll give you
Around here, when for that reason, for those reasons, you had the opening.
Yes, by opening was given by working damage control after we were bombed by the Japanese dive bomber. And I did some dangerous work, not being at all conceited, very dangerous work, and for that I was mentioned as specialist.
Anybody else got a question? Yes, please.
So, what's your parents' reaction to your joining the Navy? And did this reaction change over a period of time? And did you keep in contact with them during the course of the war?
Well, the point is that unfortunately my father died at the age of 38, and it was before war broke out. And my mother, who was widowed at a very, very young age, just had to accept it. But when I went to tell my paternal grandparents and my brother, Mayor Sholem, very, very quiet, and then after a few minutes said to me, "Folg mir, Danish." English means, "Listen to me, don't go."
So you took her advice. Anybody else? Yes, lady at the back, please.
Did you have any nightmares? Did you ever have any? First of all, thank you very much. That was, very moving. I always wonder how you felt when you were demobbed and you went back to, in inverted commas, ordinary, everyday life. How did you feel? Did you relive the army? Did you have nightmares? Did you have dreams about it? You just completely forgot about it. Navy.
Although I faced death twice during my naval experience, I didn't think about it anymore. I'd done my service, I served my king and country, and I came back to carry on as I did before I went to the Navy.
Except for 3 years old.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Tell us where you were presenting this medal. I'd like to show you the Russian medal.
At the embassy, the Russian embassy laid on a wonderful reception for us. We were addressed by the ambassador, and we thanked us all for this dangerous journey. Winston Churchill described it as the worst journey in the world, which it was. I mean, raging seas, temperatures far, far below zero, far below zero, and a tribute to British shipbuilding that the ship didn't break up, it was riveted, because we were 2,000 tons of displacement. We heard of the Queen Mary, 85,000 tons, not going as far north as we were. You understand what life aboard was for a 2,000 ton destroyer.
Can I ask if you vodka or rum?
Rum.
At the Russian embassy.
Oh, no, at the embassy I didn't drink anymore, but when I had my photograph taken with the ambassador, I said to him, "Ambassador, you won't say cheese, you'll say borscht.
That's quite nervous.
But they couldn't thank us enough.
Any more questions?
What made you join the Navy?
I was FGM.
What does that mean?
Frisch gesinnter Beschirrer. But tell you what made me join, I had a friend of mine 2 years older than I, and he came back on leave from the Navy. He said, Lionel, you're a fit young man, won't go in the forces, go in the Navy. What did I know?
Very interesting, Lionel. You know, you managed to get into this. You managed to get into the Soviet embassy in the 70s when we had the campaign to get Russians, British Russian Jews out. We tried a half a dozen times to get into there. We couldn't get the first. We got to the gate, you know, but you couldn't get anywhere. So you did very well. If we didn't know you, we could have given us an idea how we might have gone in.
The last medal they gave me was a beautiful one. As I say, I couldn't put it on. I'd be like a Russian admiral or Russian general. But beautiful medal, and my son went with me because I couldn't go the year before. My wife was very, very ill. And again, they couldn't thank us enough for what we had done in bringing badly needed supplies through this hazardous route. It really was shocking. But I survived. No doubt the Navy still did me because I cheated that twice. But it decided it wasn't time for me.
We're going to get an old George Formby song, which you probably know, Bless Them All, and it's the full page on the front page of your song sheet.
They say there's a troop ship just leaving Bombay, bound for old Blighty Shore, heavily laden with time-expired men, bound for the land they adore. There's many an airman just finishing his time, there's many a twerp signing on. You'll get no promotion this side of the ocean, so cheer up my lads, bless 'em all. Bless 'em all, bless 'em all, bless 'em all, bless 'em all, the long and the short and the tall. Bless all the sergeants and WO1s, bless all the corporals and their blinking sons, 'cause we're saying goodbye to them all, as back to their billets they crawl. You'll get no promotion this side of the ocean, so cheer up my lads, bless 'em all. Nobody knows what a twerp you have been, so cheer up my lads, bless 'em all.
There's one line there which says you'll get no promotion this side of the ocean. One of the VCs of World War I joined the 4th Pune Horse in India, and we suspect the reason for that is because it was easy to get a commission. He was a Jewish boy by being in the Indian army and being here, although he was shipped back in 1914 and killed in 1914. His bravery got a medal. Good evening again. I'd just like to introduce our second speaker, my good friend and AGEX colleague, Morden Cohen, born in 1916, now 100 years old. That in itself deserves his father, as a small child, came from Lithuania, nothing perhaps except for that. And his father eventually set up a business in Kilmarnock. But his father moved to Sunderland because he fell in love with a Sunderland girl. And that's what often happens in these situations. And that's where Morden grew up, in Sunderland. He was a keen athlete, played cricket and football for Sunderland Udeans, won a few medals at the Maccabi Games. And at 21 he qualified as a solicitor in 1937. Very shortly after, he qualified as a solicitor, but before he had too much, he volunteered in 1939 and enlisted. And as he says in his memoirs, I think it was partly influenced by a Jewish refugee girls' school in Sunderland. So I was under no illusion about what was taking place in Germany. That was part of his thinking at the time. and he was to stay in the army until after the war. He was commissioned, he served in Nigeria, India, and later Burma. And in 1942, asking a question before about kosher and so forth, Morgan, with a friend of his, Major Bernard Homer, they wrote out from memory the Yom Kippur service, as all the Machzorim had been lost at sea. That must have been a fantastic effort between you. In Burma, he met Major General Ord Wingate. And many of you know about the history of Palestine will know that Ord Wingate was in Palestine before World War II. He taught the Jews how to fight the Arabs, particularly at night. He got so friendly with them that he was shipped out by the British authorities. In November 1945, Morton came back to England, having been mentioned in dispatches. There is a story that on his way home from India, there was no schnapps or liquor on board this ship that he was on, except in the medical bay. And so the story goes that he found himself reporting sick quite often. After the bomb, he joined the Territorial Army, where he was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel. In 1947, he joined Ajax. He became National Chairman in 1993. He is a stalwart of the association. He spent many years as an active deputy on the board of deputies. He had an illustrious, distinguished legal career, and he became deputy lieutenant of Time Wear. In 1952, he married Marilla. He has 2 children. I don't know how many grandchildren or great-grandchildren. How many?
8 grandchildren, 11 great-grandchildren.
Can I introduce Mr. Morgan?
Ladies and gentlemen, I suppose if you could all hear me, I don't need what one MP that I knew called an oratorical spittoon. If you can't hear me at the back, let me know. At the outbreak of war, I was called up to man a first aid post because I was a qualified St. John Ambulance first aider, and after 3 months, as Ron told you, I decided to volunteer for service, and I volunteered for the Royal Artillery. I was posted to a town just outside Redcar in north-east Yorkshire. And after I had done my basic training, I applied for leave for Pesach. And I applied for 8 days. Now, throughout the whole of my army service, only on 2 rare occasions, for very brief periods, there was another Jew in my regiment. On this occasion, there was a Sergeant Pollock from Glasgow, who was one of our instructors, and I spoke to him and I said, have you applied for leave for Pesach? He said, yes. I said, how many days? He said, 2. So I thought, oy vey, I'm a gunner, I've applied for 8 days, he's a sergeant, I'm only going to get 2 days. But because I had applied for 8 days, he got 8 days. Well, after I got back, I was transferred to another battery in Redcar Racecourse. And my bunk was in the tote on a stone floor. And I was issued with 2 planks of wood, 6 foot by 18 inches, a palliasse, which I was told to fill with straw from the stables, and that was my bed. There I was taught how to operate artillery, 60-pounders and 6-inch howitzers, and the following month I was then transferred back to another regiment battery, where I was taught to be observation post assistant. Now, the duties of an observation post assistant was to be seated in front of the guns, preferably on raised land, and to direct the fire of the gun either more or less, east or west. And for that purpose I had to learn to read an ordnance survey map and relate it to spots on the ground on which I could direct the guns. But then came Dunkirk, and there was no need for heavy artillery, field artillery, in this country at the time, and I was transferred to another artillery unit. And it was one of the first anti-aircraft rocket batteries that we had in the country. People don't realize that in 1940 we had rockets, anti-aircraft rockets. They were at that time pretty Heath Robinson, but then I went off to practice camp in Aberporth in Wales, and then we got a secret code word which meant invasion imminent. I was then transferred from my troop to battery headquarters, and my regiment was then hurriedly brought back to the northeast and deployed in the Teesside area in the defence of Dorman Long's iron and steel works and the Imperial Chemical Industries ICI, and there we were. And then I got my first stripe as a Lance Bombardier. The sergeant in charge of the battery office then was posted elsewhere, and I was put on his stead, and I got my second stripe. I was a bombardier. One day the battery commander said to me, "Cohen, we've got to organise a church parade." Me, organise a church parade. Find a suitable church. So I looked up the road there, and there was a church about half a mile away from battery headquarters, and I reported back, and the parade was organised, and there was I in sole charge of the battery office while they went off. When they came back, battery commander said for me, and he said, "Cohen, why do you send me to that church?" I said, "You told me to find a church." "Yes," he said, "but not a bloody high church." Now then, how was I to know that? We had one of our troops about 10 miles away, defending in a small village one of Dorman Long's iron and steel works. And one day the battery commander said to me, "Cohen, we've got to organise an FFI, see the local doctor," because we didn't have a regimental doctor. Now an FFI meant that the troops had to expose themselves to show that they were not suffering from any venereal disease. Well, I got in touch with the local doctor, and it was arranged that the local doctor would come the following week to examine and inspect the men. And when I got back, I reported to the battery commander, "I've been in touch with the local village doctor, and she said that she will become..." The battery commander nearly blew his top. He said, "You want a bloody riot amongst the men?" Well, that passed on, and by the end of the year I'd already had my third stripe, and I was a sergeant. in 1941, the beginning of 1941, I was recommended for a commission. And before I went off to WW2, I was attached to the 8th Belfast Heavily Anti-Aircraft Regiment, which was stationed quite near actually. It was a Territorial Army unit. And I went there to learn about the operation of heavy anti-aircraft guns. Now this was the third type of gun that I'd served on within a year. And also I learned the intricacies of the instruments, the height finder, and also the radar. But we didn't call it radar in those days, but you didn't mention it. It was called GL. GL stood for gun lane. Well, after I'd been there, I was sent off to WW2, which was in Shrivenham, down south, which is not far from Swindon. And there were 30 cadets in my squad. And when we assembled, the officer in charge of our squad started to call the roll to us to check who we were and to identify us. And when it came to the name of Cohen, 2 of us stood up. Out of 30 cadets, 2 were called Cohen, both of them solicitors. Dear Cohen, Albert Cohen, came from Bootle. He was a very good cricketer, and he was in charge of the WW2 cricket team. And because I had done some athletics, I was in charge of the WW2 athletics team. Well, when it came to Rosh Hashanah, I managed to get leave. Unfortunately, I had an uncle and aunt who were evacuated at Cheltenham, and I managed to be able to go there. But when it came to Yom Kippur, on no account could I get leave, because that was the day of our passing out parade. But we arranged that Albert and I would attend the parade, and after the parade was over, we would be excused all duties and go and lie down on our bunk for the rest of the day. Before I was commissioned, I was asked where I would like to be posted. And tongue-in-cheek, I said, the northeast. Well, as luck would have it, I was posted to a regiment in Newcastle. It was the 63rd Heavy Anti-Aircraft Regiment, which was a local Sunderland Territorial Army regiment. I knew some of the officers, and more importantly, I knew the colonel, who was a professional colleague of mine. Now that I was stationed at various anti-aircraft posts on the Tyne, and we were in action most evenings. You know, the aircraft would come across 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and you have to be prepared to get off your bunk, get dressed, and out onto the guns and the control room within a minute, and with no lights on. And that was it. I was in action several times that way. Enemy aircraft used to come across from Scandinavia and bomb the Tyne, Weir and Tees shipyards. Well, it so happened that my regiment were told they had to go overseas. And before they could be relieved of their post, they sent me down to T. Croy's in Anglesey, there to instruct one of the first mixed regiments in our methods of gun control. What I mean by mixed regiment was that the operators of the radar and all the instruments and the telephones were ATS. And one had to get used to the presence of ATS in your unit. And I came back with them to Newcastle, where they took over from my regiment, and they asked me if I would stay behind in order to supervise this mixed regiment to see that they operated all right. Now, that if anybody says that they were not nervous the first time they went into action, they're not telling the truth. Now, remember the first night the ATS went into action, I could see that they were a bit unsure of themselves. So I said to their officer, will you let me and my handful of male sergeants there take over from them and show them how we operate during an air raid, and after the next engagement we handed back to the girls and they were fine. Then in 1942, I was told I had to report to the Royal Artillery Depot at Woolwich. I reported there, and I was kitted out in tropical kit, but I wasn't told where I was to go. I then went by train to Liverpool and boarded the Athlone Castle. Now then, this was a converted cruise ship, and I was given a bunk in the converted ballroom, which has 360 bunks for officers, 3 bunks high. And fortunately I had the top bunk, I got an extra 3 inches. While I was there, another officer came up to me and said, I'm sorry, I think you've got my bunk. I said, I'm sorry, no you're not, I've got it on here on my list. I said, what's your name? He said, Cohen. So that was the second instance where I met Cohen. And he was never Cohen. He was a colonial servant in Nigeria and was back in England on leave. And when I compared my coding on my luggage with his, I then realized that I was going to Nigeria. As a matter of fact, about 18 months later, I met his parents in Calcutta. So we arrived in Lagos, and I was stationed with guns on Lagos racecourse. That's my second encounter with the racecourse. And thereafter I was called, my soldiers were all Nigerians with a small cadre of British NCOs. And most of the African soldiers came from northern Nigeria, and they hardly spoke English. They only spoke Hausa, and we were told that we had to learn Hausa, which I did. But I said, look, this is silly. We are going to go abroad, further afield, with these soldiers. We get bumped off. Replacements are going to come out, They don't speak a word of Hausa. The soldiers will not speak a word of English, and they won't be able to command them. So we taught them English. Fortunately, I had under me in my troop two officers who were school teachers, and we taught them to speak English. After I'd been there a little while, Bernard Homer, who Ron mentioned, a doctor who was very well known in Stamford Hill, who was there in Nigeria as Deputy Assistant Director of Medical Services. And he said to me one day, he said, we've got to organise services for Yom Kippur. Now, we couldn't organise them for Rosh Hashanah. See, Nigeria is a country the size of France and Spain put together. Then it had a population of 80 million. Today it's 160 million. And we said to England, we could only organise services because of the spread of the troops over the country for Yom Kippur. That we did. We had ordered Matzeren from England, but the ship that brought them over was torpedoed. Bernard Homer and I sat down and we wrote out Kol Nidre from memory. And years later, when I compared it with the original text, we were only 3 words wrong. Well, we had the service, and then he said to me, we've got to organise services for Pesach. So this time, having learned not to communicate with England, we got in touch with the Board of Temperatures in Johannesburg, and we ordered matzah meal, and wine. A month before Pesach, Bernard Homer said to me, I'm very sorry, Morton, I've got to hand this all over to you, because apparently one member of his family who was evacuated either America or Canada had been involved in an accident, and he got compassionately. All right, he said, it's all right, all the things will arrive and you can organise the services. Well, a fortnight before Pesach, nothing. A week before Pesach, nothing. Come Pesach, nothing. A week after Pesach, I get a phone call from the Chaplain General's office. There's a big parcel here from the Israel and they own it. I'm coming to collect it. And I took a 3-tonner and collected it. Now, how do I get rid of everything? Well, with the wine there was no problem. But with the matzah meal, well, I took a little matzah myself. But how do I get rid of a big load? Now that I knew of a Jewish civilian who was serving on the Nigerian railways, a Mr. Levi, and I phoned him. I said, would you like a little matzah? I didn't say a little matzah. Oh, he said, certainly. I haven't had it for a long time. So I took the whole lot, dumped it on him, with sufficient matzah for about 3 years. Then we were told that all local leave had been stopped, and the regiment was going to go further afield. We didn't know where, we weren't told. And I had an African Nigerian sergeant, Dabokano. No soldier had served in the Ethiopian campaign, came to me and said, "Sir, me want leave, sir." I said, "I'm sorry, all leave's been stopped." He said, "Sir, me want leave, I want to collect powerful juju." And that was the Hausa word for a charm. I said, well, how long will it take you to get to your village? He said, take me 3 years, three days there, 3 days back, 1 day in my village. That shows you the size of Nigeria. Well, I could trust him. I gave him leave, and he came back, and he said, you want to see powerful juju, sir? He said, yes. He then produced a strap, which he put on his arm, with a pouch, with verses from the Quran, another one round his neck, with a pouch, with verses from the Quran. And what does that remind you of? the great similarities. And because I'd learned to speak Hausa, and I used to speak to them in their tongue about the Oba Ibrahim and Avram Avinu. They didn't know what a Jew was. They used to call me the white Muslim. Well, we then went out by ship. We didn't know where. We put in at Durban for 5 days, and I was able to see members of the family. We started to sail off again. We thought we were going up the coast to the 8th Army in Africa, but no, we went across the Indian Ocean and we landed in Bombay. And my time is short, but in due course we deployed our regiment on the Indian Burma frontier, and there we were defending RAF strips. And while I was there, I was lucky. I managed to get leave for Pesach in 1944. And we were there until the end of the war. On my birthday, on the 6th of August 1945, I got the best birthday present that anybody could get. The first atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. That was virtually the end of the war. 3 days later, there was Nagasaki, and dropped another bomb, but the Japanese had surrendered within a week. Let me finish off. When people used to ask me, what was it like fighting against the Japanese? I said the Japanese were the first suicide bombers. Their pilots, the Nagasaki bombers, would pick out a target, dive onto him, destroy the target, but kill themselves in the process. They were also not only cruel fighters, but they also used to prey on the minds of British soldiers. There was one of our divisions was cut on both sides, and we had to supply them by air. And at night, the Japanese would call them up 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Tommy, can you hear me? Tommy, do you know that the Americans are in England? Tommy, do you know what they are saying about the Americans? They are over here, overpaid, oversexed. Tommy, do you know where your wife is this evening? This went on until we reached them. At the end of the war, of course, I was left to wind up all the brigade to see all the soldiers were back to West Africa. They were all volunteers, and we had to make special arrangements to get back. The other British officers made their own way back, and I ultimately came back to England in December of 1945. and then I was demobilised, put onto the reserve in March of 1946. I thought there's much more I'd like to tell you, but time cooking. Thank you very much.
Any questions of Morden? Anybody got any questions of Morden?
Yes. What rank were you when you demobbed?
I was captain.
And I'm captain.
Yes.
Were you involved at all in the Battle of Kohima? Were you nearby in that part of
We had part of my regiment were in Fog, which was under siege at one time, and another battery was in the Kohima area.
Anybody else? Yes.
Just wondering, did you encounter any anti-Semitism during your career?
I did, and throughout the whole of my army service, I never had any personally encounter any personal anti-Semitism. There were two occasions, although, where somebody made anti-Semitic remarks. One was in 1940. We were busy digging trenches on the cliffs of Edgware, anticipating the German invasion, when a veteran and another squad started talking about Jews, not mine, but talking about Jews generally. And I went up to him and told him what was necessary to tell him, and heard nothing more. The second occasion was after the war in the Territorial Army in Wales. I was in the officers' mess. When in came another officer with the dog, and people started admiring it. And he happened to mention to me, although it was very useful for me to help the Palestinians chase the Jews. I went up to him and I said, "You just insulted me. I'm a Jew, and I served." He slunk out with his tail between his legs. And the other members of the mess came up and apologized. Those were the only two occasions. Personally, nobody ever. I mean, what people said behind my back, I wouldn't know. Face, no.
Just one another question. Morden mentioned teaching Hausa, I think it was, in Nigeria. There was a story about a Jewish prisoner of war held in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. And as you all know, that was a horrendous situation. And one day the colonel in charge of the camp came up to this Jewish prisoner of war and said, "I'd like to learn English." "Yes, sir." He said, "and I want you to teach me." He said, "I know it'll take a long time, but you're here for a long time." And so he taught him. He gave him lessons, and the colonel was very pleased. What the colonel didn't know was he wasn't taught English, he was taught Yiddish.
While the soldiers were away at war, of course there were people here on the home front. They were having to go to the shelters, they were listening to the sirens and waiting for the all clear. In 1941 it wasn't at all clear when the war was going to end, and everyone, all the dance bands, Harry Roy, Lou Stone, and of course the Forces Sweetheart sang when they sound the last all clear, which is on the other side of your song sheet.
When they sound the last all clear, a happy happy my darling will be when they turn up the lights and the dark lonely nights are only a memory. Nevermore we'll be apart, always together, sweetheart, for the peace bells will ring and the whole world will sing when they sound the last all clear.
Now I'm going to show a video called Jewish Heroes, which doesn't require explaining. It lasts about 20-25 minutes, and you'll see.
Most Jewish people are not so recognizable, but they have contributed a great deal to the world and to Great Britain in many different fields.
Walking in the field, he steps onto a mine, it goes up in the air, one leg goes off, and I get the blast again. And he's shouting, help me, help me, help me. What do? It's pitch black. I'm laying there, I'm in the minefield. I don't know what to do. This guy, I have to leave, I can't slap him on my shoulder, he's dead. The Germans were robbing the shells out after the soldiers and wounding them and killing them. All day, all night, they're slapping soldiers away. It was a bloodbath.
Be with one of the first units to enter Belsen concentration camp, and that really was a horrendous experience. Spent 2 days there, saw things that I will never forget. Still think about to this day.
Age shall grow, not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years in death. At the coming downs of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them.
I'm going to break that temper studio, and we do have to wind up proceedings now. The sheriff will agree, if you want any of the additional songs we were going to play, we can do them after the meeting is ended. Max Miller once said, they don't make them any more dark, do they, like they used to, and I think that's true of the people we've heard tonight. We often say that we want people to live for 120, but I'm sure these very brave soldiers will last forever. I'd like to think that when I'm their age, I'm going to be as fit as they are. It's been an extraordinary evening. If we put tonight's proceedings on YouTube, I think it's likely to go viral. Now, in the advertising that we put out, we said that Morton Cohen had an old bottle of brandy, which he had with his commander at the end of the war. We're aware that old soldiers like to drink, and I'm going to call on our chairman to present a little something for each of the gentlemen who gave us the presentation.
actually echo Spencer's thoughts on this evening. It's been quite fantastic. We've had an inspirational, an emotional, and a highly informative evening, and for that we must thank, in the usual way, our two wonderful speakers, Lieutenant Colonel Morgan Curry and our very own Malcolm Lassman. I'd like to offer our two speakers a very small token of our appreciation for their coming here this evening and giving us wonderful talk on their experience.
We're actually finished with a Spitfire display, and you've got the words there, like cliffs of Dover.
There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover tomorrow. Just you wait and see.